The Soldier, Months of Ice, Year 2. Smoke and fire and steel and progress were not the only things that broke the night air. Permafrost scurried away on swift legs, desperate to escape the crackling, pressed plates that sank into ice-scoured dirt and made way for larger constructions. And further still were the great lights that shone defiantly up towards the sky, some bright yellow and others gentle blue, but all casting around in a way that was both beguiling and intimidating. The complex of concrete superplexes, tunnels, fences, and modular buildings would have been familiar to any who had grown up in the yards, and to those who had not, a warning that all the same, that they were neither welcome, and should turn back. So it was with some surprise that the small, autonomous orb continued to watch the indomitable, if somewhat unkempt, woman attempting to climb over the fence time and again. She showed no care for the dangerous barbs of the fences that stung like iron thorns, nor for her own wounds, though they were just minor and superficial. No, the stranger did show some concern, perhaps, for the tiny bundle she carried with her, containing what the orb registered as something of pink hue and soft complexion. The stranger stopped numerous times to check on her miniature companion, who would occasionally reassure her, nervously. Unseen, the orb retreated to its master, whose feet lay off one of the many soot and iron towers of district. Ruslana smiled up at it, even though it was a completely inanimate drone. It was her other eye, after all.
Good job, memory. To know if it's a hostile though. If they're hostile. Nothing alive's come through in these months. Dominus, I can't even imagine that anything can live out there in the ice flats, for long.
The orb listened intently. It was not in its programming, but being an inanimate object, it was quite good at the task. Ruslana took a bite of a sandwich, trying to ignore the fact that it tasted a little of soot itself. Supplies were decent here, but everything tasted of it, over time. The rock folk didn't really need food, of course, so it was mostly her and Binky and that weird guy who had moved in, and none of them really complained.
Is all as it should be.
With a hiss that echoed the bellows of the forges so far below, Grendolf appeared beside her, grey mists doing little to hide the stretched red flesh of the lich's skull. She couldn't say that she had grown to like him, exactly, but little by little, Ruslana felt as if she might have begun to understand his strange, peculiar humor.
You're not allowed to criticize me for this, but I'm pretty torn.
Pointing to the distant figure, now on their fifth attempt, Ruslana frowned.
On the one hand, I really feel I ought to go down there and help that traveler up. I suppose they could be an out-and-out threat, but if they're having that much trouble with a fence...
She gave a half-hearted shrug, that didn't hide an equally half-hearted smile.
But I mean, on the other hand, I'm kind of impressed by how intense she is. Depriving her of victory at this point almost seems cruel itself, right?
Sighing, Ruslana folded her arms over her legs, watching the creeping cold of her breath as she exhaled.
I once knew a great sage, wise in justice and in peace, powerful in the working of weather and the ways of law. We were enemies, of course, but I cannot shake the feeling that your aid is more important than her misguided pride. You must have known a lot of people, Grendolf. More than will be forgotten by the time I die, child.
His laughter was the deep and sonorous cackle of a well-taxidermied serpent, or what she felt a serpent might sound like if it had been preserved in a vat of whatever kept all the specimens alive to look at, and remember a time when the land had been alive. But Ruslana didn't stay to humor his laughter, already sliding down the tower with practiced care. There were edges and grips to aid in rapid ascent or descent, carefully masked to look a part of each and every building. If that bastard or anyone else tried to invade, the place would be their tomb. Her confidence was unshakable. No snow cushioned her fall, being as that the weather was much warmer here, not due to the temperature, but the constant movement of refuges, the artificial heat created by life, foundries and workshops, and the 2 writhing generators they had salvaged with Grendolf's mysterious knowledge. At times it was almost too warm, lending to a strange paradox of needing cold weather gear to explore around the environs, and feeling a sweltering and oppressive heat in the city of district as it was. Well, whatever. That one guy had promised he'd get a noodle stand opened at some point, after he had finished entertaining the talking crickets. She wasn't sure she trusted anyone that looked so smug, but Ruslana wasn't keen on trust, in general.
Hey! You! Stop crawling over there! You're going to rip your hands open, yeah.
Immediately, the stranger stopped as if struck, her expression not one of fear but of almost childish embarrassment. Her hands already were lightly bloodied, and she instinctively wiped them against her suit pants.
Ah, ha. Guess I wasn't thinking that far ahead, miss. I must look a pretty proper fool.
Her laugh was braying, the kind that Ruslana associated with some of the older civilians she had met. The ones who had just given up. Ruslana's eyes narrowed. Right. She could recognize it almost instantly. False assurances on sunny demeanors that never seemed to fade, even when bombs were falling. The ability to lie to others and yourself, just in the hope of making things a little better, even for a day, even for a while. She didn't hate it, but... Tightening her fists, Ruslana adjusted her scarf and stared the stranger down until she stopped smiling.
You don't look like a fool. You look like someone desperate to get in here, Civvy. You don't look like a threat, so why not just explain what you're looking for, and move on?
The cute pink thing whispered, and the stranger instantly looked at ease once more, that unnervingly placid smile sinking back onto her face.
Well, you know. I'm looking for a friend.
Time passed in the quiet, all-consuming dark lit up by an equally artificial floodlights. Ruslana realized how ridiculous her look of shock must have been, holding back the sudden realization of just whom another human might have been looking for, especially one from back home. Unable to contain her laughter, Ruslana tried to apologize for several times, only to find the stranger laughing too, and then the little pink thing. Hey. Maybe it wasn't some deep, dark way of coping with the yards, maybe it was just how this weirdo was. Rubbing her cold flushed cheek, Ruslana shook her head and managed to contain her laughter. Somehow.
Look, get on in here. I'm not sure how you missed it, but, gods. The entrance is right over there. It's not even guarded openly. It's to lure people in, separate those who are out to cause trouble from those who are just looking for a place to catch their breath a while.
Having a conversation through barbed wire was strange, and nostalgic. The stranger, Koza, apparently, but that was a silly name, seemed completely unconcerned by her own injuries or the cold, and apparently had been traveling with the little pink thing. Boleslava, who Binky had mentioned. Possibly? For some time.
Oh, we're just going to keep traveling after this, too. I hear that the icefall is the worst of it, and the last season lets up. Besides, this is nothing compared to winter, right? Right on.
It was a joke that wouldn't have made sense to anyone outside of the yards, since it wasn't winter they were discussing, nor a cold that bore remembering. Not now, at least. The new gates of district had been cut from steel and hauled into place by Binky. If the big guy was leaving, Ruslana felt she'd be sad to see him go. But this place was a place of law, that didn't mean she'd make the same mistakes as home. If she could help it. Not here. Not again. Suddenly, her expression soured, and the soldier felt her good eye narrow in concert with the bad one.
You wouldn't happen to have run into an old guy on your way here? Well preserved, carries himself with a dire attitude, keeps good company in his bad presence.
Her words were curt, but from the sudden peal of laughter that she caused, Ruslana could already guess the answer. It felt like her breath might freeze in her throat.
Leo, oh, if he's a friend of yours, you just missed him. We passed him in.
But suddenly, a strange look came over Koza's face. Not entirely pleasant, nor at all what Ruslana had come to expect. The stranger's laughter stopped, and she whispered something to her companion, who shook and replied in an equally quiet murmur.
Perhaps it's best if I don't divulge that information right now, sorry. But, I can promise he's nearby here. If you're looking for him, you're in the right place. And if you're not, well, he didn't cause us any trouble.
It was a sentence that implied as much as it didn't. And if caused you any trouble, that's no concern of ours. Fine. That was fine. Maybe this Koza had already wandered into a few other blood feuds on the island, Not everyone was understanding or good, as Ruslana well knew, nor was any human or monster trustworthy simply because things could have been better here. Should have been. An idle thought crossed her mind, and she found herself smiling wistfully without any intention of doing so.
His companions. All right. Oh, they're fine. I'd go so well as to say very fine. Well, a stay underground wasn't doing wonders for them, but then again, I think they'd been there even longer than I had.
Koza idly mentioned the underground, and her voice spoke not of caverns but of tunnels, ratways and siege passages far beneath the earth, the kind that Ruslana would know in any case, in any world. Her already pale skin went whiter still, and Ruslana made a show of not breaking her expression.
A lot of our residents live underground. There are complexes we just finished building.
She didn't mean to stammer. Damn it, she hadn't meant to show weakness at all. But the stranger didn't prey on it, merely continued to imply without implications as embers and soot rose up upon the night wind.
I reckon you might want to move those up, if you can. I don't know if anything unpleasant is going to happen, because we parted ways with the three of them triumphantly returning to the grounds above. All the same.
Koza went silent, savoring the mix of cold air and smoke. Then, of course, she began to laugh again, breaking the tension and coughing uproariously, which sounded as unpleasant as it looked, Ruslana noted.
Hey, I'm sorry, but you've clearly got means of production and stuff set up here, right? Could I trouble you for cigarettes? Yeah. I think this was my last one.
Ruslana noted that the stranger's pink companion may have covertly thrown something to the retreating snow around the entrance arch, but made no comment of it.
Afraid I can't help you there, even if I'd help feed your bad habits, Sibby. There's no such thing as tobacco anywhere on the island, far as I know.
And so, with the stranger crying crocodile tears, the three entered into district. Koza made every pretense of being a stunned visitor, and seemed very friendly with the rock folk, Ruslana noted. But more interesting still was Boleslava, for once the temperature became more regulated, the pink creature hopped to the ground and began communicating with them animatedly. Her whispers were quiet, and maybe not even intelligible, but she clearly understood the glowing of the rock people for more than just general emotion, and would occasionally whisper something to Koza, who seemed entirely too amused by everything. For a few moments, she considered detaining both of them, but they seemed too happy to simply be here, and as hard as it had been, as hard as she felt she had to be, that wasn't right. Not here, and not today. Her decision felt moderately ratified when they reached Foundry 2A, and Koza packed up everything and ran in. Binky seemed more confused than anything at first, until he saw Boleslava, and then burst into huge, single-eyed tears that threatened to dampen the foundry and ruin production. Issuing him a temporary remandment from work, for as long as he so chose, Ruslana watched the three of them walk off, listening to their happy, enthused banter with a soft smile. And perhaps, just a little bit of sorrow. Underground was calmer, the more so as she ushered residents out. They left so orderly. The rock folk seemed to already know what was going on as they moved into the fortifications above, hopefully for a short time only. She didn't know if they needed comfort per se, but
I do not trust her.
Once again, and confounding as always, Grendolf had appeared at her side. At his side he carried a bevy of materials from elsewhere, not their world exactly, but others that confused even him, for the Lich was not a master of planar magics. She could see bundles of plastic, vending machine food, video cassettes with questionable, hand-printed titles. It was hard not to wonder if he looked for only the most useful of items, or if the Lich had a particular kind of taste. The corner of her lips twitched, but Ruslana managed to avoid smiling.
Me neither. I don't think she's a hostile, but, I don't know. I just have this feeling when I look at her. It's the same feeling you get when you see a diminishing inland sea, if that makes sense. It doesn't make sense, but fortunately I have known many who communicate in peculiar tongue.
Once again, Grendolf managed to smirk without his skull moving in the slightest manner. The perk of being undead, perhaps.
I feel she, too, has been between. Whither and why, I cannot say, perhaps it is not her. Perhaps. Bah! Should I have fetched her some of those vile self-poisoning tubes?
Ruslana fixed the arch-lich with a withering stare honed on soldier brats who hadn't been too keen on authority. After a few moments, the lich was surprised to find himself looking away, and Ruslana fought back the urge to grin in pride.
Don't aid people's bad habits. Your own work, that's fine. But the moment you become just an interplanar errand boy for people with bad ties.
The joke fell flat, as Ruslana realized that Grendolf had stopped walking. The lich looked, of all things.
You're right, of course. It was just, for a moment, I almost felt reminded of Isilthwist. I am sorry, it was irrational. It will not happen again.
Under the ground, in the caverns carved out by the rock folk, the soldier and the lich stood silently and awkwardly. Ruslana ran a hand against the rock well, trying to trace it and perhaps find something she could say. She wasn't even certain if she wanted to comfort him, exactly, but perhaps she had felt that exhaustion before, herself. And perhaps it was what a hero might have done. Casting her good eye in Grendolf's direction, Ruslana began to speak and the underground cavern complex trembled around them. Grendolf's supplies fell to the ground, forgotten, as the lich reappeared with a hiss of reality beside her, and the two stepped through something, returning to the surface in the blink of an eye. Despite the fact it could not have been more than 50 feet, Ruslana felt a near overpowering nausea that she only managed to get the better of through force of will. Grendolf watched her quietly, gauging her reaction with well-concealed nervousness.
That was dangerous and I should not have done that, I apologize. But it was necessary if...
Ruslana cut him off with a sharp shake of her head.
Don't worry. Fine. I'm fine. Memory, get out there, find what's up. Grendolf, get around town. Make sure people are safe. Get ready to fight.
We're not ready.
If need be, get ready to die. I'd really rather not though, so.
Her joke was absorbed by the cold silence, for the lich had already disappeared. Ruslana laughed quietly to herself, and pulled herself together. If this was to be the end. I'm sorry I couldn't deliver your message in person, Kaylee. Guess we'll see each other again. The cold felt odd around her, however, and the nausea returned, with a powerful sense of foreboding. Grendolf appeared in front of her, and though she could not see any visible change in his perspective, she could hear the anxiety on every word.
It is neither Lazarus, nor Dragunov. The complex has begun to sink into the permafrost. And more than that.
The searchlights seemed wildly around them, and Ruslana's determination returned.
We'll deal with it, then. I'll deal with it.
As one entity, her rifle slid easily into her hands. However, when the lich explained their other problem, her expression grew clouded as the sky above, the cold mocking and belittling them from a haven untouchable to they who lay below. For indeed, there were many. As out of the receding and cracking permafrost around district passed a procession of strange, demonic courtiers, doing their level best to look uninterested and avoid the gaze of the exhausted lich and confounded soldier as they passed. Chapter end.